if people have got Bibles and like to follow along in their Bibles, we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel 11. So we're going to look at 2 Samuel 11, but we're also going to be dipping into Psalm 51. So there's two bits that we're going to be looking at today. So if you want to put your fingers in those, that will be great. Okay, so this will all become clear. We've moved the cross in here. We were worried about breaking the cross, but we've got it all in one piece. So we are all safe, and Lucas can breathe easy. So we're going to look at a story today that kind of snowballed out of control. Now I have a friend, his friend is called Mark. He doesn't like coming to this church because I speak of him often. And generally, he's a man who is, his decision making is not the best. That would be a kind way of putting it. He's a panicker. Things happen and they quickly tumble out of control and he ends up in a bad place. And some years ago, my friend Mark was visiting a girlfriend's parents for the first time. So he was going down, they lived in the south, so he stayed there for the weekend. And that's that kind of nerve-wracking, stomach-churning kind of thing. Like, be on my best behaviour, don't do anything stupid. And that was fine, and it was all going okay. And then a couple of days in, my friend managed to block their toilet. And so he was panicking, because it was a nice, bright, white bathroom set. And he was like, all right, so he was telling us this story a few days later, and he's like, so I blocked their toilet. And we were like, right, so what did you do? And the sensible approach is to get the toilet brush and have a go. And so he was like, no, I didn't want to do that because it was white and I didn't want them to think I was a dirty boy. And so I said, what did you do, Mark? He said, well, and he's a scientist, and so he said, I got some toilet roll and tried to make like a rocket by kind of making a funnel. And we all looked and went, did that work? He went, no, it was chaos. He just said it just filled up. There was paper everywhere. I'm panicking. I flushed the toilet like 4 times now. This is not good. And we're like, what did you do? And he said, I literally had no idea what to do. So I just rolled up my sleeves and stuck my... And we were there, you did not. And he was like, you've got to do what you've got to do. And he said, but that's not the worst bit. He said, the worst bit is, then I turn round, there's no sink in the toilet. Who has no sink to wash your hands in the toilet? So what kind of family is this? And at this point, his girlfriend's outside the door going, Mark, you alright? Because he's been in that toilet for too long. And so he's thinking, well, my hands are soaking wet and unclean. She's outside the door. What am I going to do? So he tried to play it cool. And so he kind of opened the door and, yeah, I'm fine. Gave her a kiss. And without thinking, ran his hands through her hair. A terrible human being. He's married now, not to that woman. And so... quite quickly, we're going to see that things that you can make a mistake, and if your decision making is poor, it can quite quickly get out of control. I invite my mate Mark to me preach. I did not invite him today, and so he would not have liked that. And so we're going to look at a story from David's, which is a lot more sinister and a lot more serious. But the kind of point is the same, that it starts with something that can be managed and can be walked away from, and quite quickly it tumbles out of control. And we're going to see that story here. And so... we've seen a lot of good stuff about David over the past few weeks. So we've seen a lot of kind of times where David has acted with integrity when it's been difficult to do so. And we've seen times when David's made mistakes. But we're going to see probably the worst part of his story now. And so as we look at 2 Samuel 11, we're going to read through the chapter. It's kind of got five points really, or 5 acts to the chapter. If this was kind of a Shakespearean kind of play, you'd probably split it into 5 points. Okay, so we're going to talk through these 5 points as we go. So 2 Samuel chapter 11 tells us from verse 1, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Okay, so that's Act 1, is he sent the army off. And for once, David's not gone with the army. He's decided to stay at home, and he stayed in Jerusalem. So he's away from his men, he's away from the army, and he stayed in Jerusalem. Then Act 2, the next thing that happens, from verse 2 to 5, tells us, one evening David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of his palace. From the roof he saw a woman washing. That woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. That man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. Okay, so David's there on the roof, and he sees this woman who's beautiful. And instead of kind of walking away from that and then taking that moment, or even, because David was a man who had many wives, and we're not in that place, so he had a few wives and we live in different times, so that is not okay. Not everything we see in the Bible is an instruction on how to live. Okay, and so David having many wives is definitely not right, and neither is thankfully what we're going to see here. So David could walk away, but he sends his men, says, "Who's that?" And they come back and say, "That is the wife of one of your mighty men, one of the men that you've just sent to fight in battle." Okay, and again, David had an opportunity to let it drop there and walk away, but he doesn't. He calls her in, and at this point things start to tumble out of control. And so verse 6, David then says, "Send this word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go to the house. David was told, Uriah did not go home. Okay, and so at this point, before we get into the kind of plan for, David's now started to cover it up. He thinks, right, if I can send Uriah home, then maybe Uriah will kind of sleep with his wife, they'll get pregnant, and I won't be discovered. I can cover it up, we can say it's Uriah's kid, it's not a problem. So David has a plan to cover up what he's done. But the problem is, as we see in verse 10, it starts to not happen because Uriah doesn't go home. And in verse 11, Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are in tents. My commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How can I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." So the problem with that is Uriah has got too much integrity. Okay, his men are there, potentially giving their lives, and he's going to refuse to go home and just be with his wife. And so he's just going to stay there till he's sent back to the battlefield. So David's plan now is not going to work. David's plan to cover up his sin, to cover up his mistake, is starting to tumble. And so David comes up with a plan B. And we're not going to really read the whole thing of the plan B, but then David says, "Stay one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you home." And so Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among the master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die." And that is the plan that ultimately David comes up with, and then the chapter goes on to say basically that happened, and somebody else also lost their life because of it. So David has made a few mistakes, and from that point, instead of just kind of coming clean and saying, "I have messed up," he tries to cover it, he tries to make all these things that no one would know, the mistakes he's made, that no one would see what's in his life. He tries to layer on cover up. And it ultimately ends in the death of some people. And it ultimately ends that he's in a terrible place. And we're going to see that, as Lucas shared last week, and Lucas shared on the small things, don't let the devil in the details, of how God is interested in the details of our lives. And as we make decisions, as things that seem so small to us at first, they can take us to a really horrible place. We might not be in places where we actually murder people, but we will be in places where we can be so far from what God has for us, so far from who we're supposed to be. And that can all start with just little decisions and little things. Lucas said about the foxes, and don't let them into the vineyard to destroy it. And I was sat next to Dan, who's a farmer, and he was going, "You won't get foxes in a vineyard." So I stay away from the farming references, because I know that Dan will be judging me for my lack of knowledge. But the point is that David didn't set out that day to be a murderer. He didn't set out to kill one of his men. Okay, David just was at home, he saw a woman, he took a shine to her, and instead of then acting with integrity, things got away from him, and things ended up terribly. And so as we see that if King David can fall, a man who's described as a man after God's own heart, none of us in the room are immune to that. None of us in the room are immune to kind of temptation or sin coming to our door. We are not so strong that you think, well, I can never do this or that or this or that. That won't happen to me. You know, well, David is a man, as we said, who's acted with integrity when it's been easier to kind of act with anger and act with violence and react to people. And he didn't. He acted with integrity before then. But what he'd done in the past was no guarantee that he was going to act with integrity today. There was no guarantee that, he's always been good, so he'll be good in this one. Well, no, that decision came to him, and what he needed to do was act in a godly manner. But what he did was he acted in a manner that was pleasing to himself, and that was very much displeasing. We see at the end of the end of that chapter, it says, "And what David had done displeased God." And obviously it did. What David had done was a disgusting and horrible thing. And just as God, we believe, has a plan for our lives, Okay, and the way that we find out that plan is we know that the kind of overarching thing, as Pete said today, we know what God wants us to do. He wants us to go out and preach the gospel. He wants us to love those who are not loved. He wants us to draw near to him. But in the details of that, the specific details of your life will be different to the specific details of my life. But the way we find that out is we stay in tune with God. We stay in tune with His Spirit. We stay close to Him, and we know He's leading in His guidance. And as we do that, we know the plan He has for us. But just as God has a plan for us, so it tells us in John that the enemy comes to steal, kill and destroy. And the enemy will come to dress up death as if it was this beautiful thing. And as we see Bathsheba, he dresses up as this great, beautiful thing. But the enemy knows that this will bring division and this will bring death. Okay, and that is what sin is dressed up as. It can always seem great at the time. If sin seemed like a bad idea, none of us would do it. The enemy would dress it up as if it's going to be great. And before we know it, it leads to death of things in our hearts. And it leads to death of passion, of vision, of relationships, of hope. And we can be in a place where we feel lost and we feel hopeless. Okay, and in Proverbs, I didn't say we're going to Proverbs, we're going to Proverbs. And so, with Proverbs 5, in relation to adultery and in relation to sexual sin, Proverbs 5, this is Solomon. So this would have been the son of David and Bathsheba, the son of one of the sons of what has come from David doing this. And what he says about adultery, bear in mind he was a child that was born out of this adultery. He talks about it and says, for the lips of the adulterous woman, and we're not we're looking at adultery as a thing from the enemy. We're not saying adulterous women are bad and adulterous men are good. That is not what we're saying here. We're saying from the lips of the adulterous woman. So think of that as the kind of spirit of adultery, this kind of temptation that the enemy would bring to us. Her speech is smoother than oil and her lips drip honey. But in the end she is as bitter as gall. She is sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Now then, son, listen to me, and do not turn aside from what I say. And this is the key verse. Keep to a path far from her. Don't go near the door of her house, lest you lose your honour to others and your dignity to one who is cruel. And so what he's saying there is don't kind of mess around going, yeah, but this bit's probably okay, and edge towards, and edge towards, and edge towards. And before we know it, we're in a terrible place. He says keep far from a door. And that doesn't just apply to kind of sexual sin. That applies to all kinds of sin. If you struggle with things, you know you have a weakness in certain things, you have an obligation to stay far from that door. Because when you start down that journey, you don't know where things can end up if you are not close to God. And if you lose sight of God, we can be leaving ourselves in horrible and terrible places. But just as the enemy has come to steal, kill and destroy and leave us in places that would seem like death is there and we just feel just worthless and nothing, that we have a God who raises things from the dead. We have a God who is believing in resurrection. We have a God who knows what it is to bring life out of that has been destroyed. Okay, and we've sang today that Jesus, you make all things new. And that is a story of so many of us in this place, that we were once dead and we're now alive. That we once had things that would just kind of rotted in our hearts, but Jesus brought life to them. He brought a freshness, and somehow He brought hope where there deserved to be no hope. He brought life where we deserved death. And that is the truth that we've got. And we're going to do something with that in a second. But I'm going to whiz through the second point. It's very quick, the second point. Because this happens, and David has tried to cover things up. And in 1 Samuel 12, which we're not going to read, a prophet comes. So a prophet, Nathan, he comes. And prophets had a rough deal. Okay, because prophets had to go to kings and often give them bad news. And no one likes giving bad news because no one likes to be told off. You know, like even now in work, if someone gets told off by the boss, you know, we're still on the chat panel at work going, "Oh, got told off," because we're children. And so like it's like when you've been told off, there's nothing worse than your mates going, "Got told off," "Ooh, got told off," because you get really angry and very frustrated, and we hate it. And I remember when I was a kid, I lived in a terraced house which had like a passageway going from my house to like the end of another 6 houses down. So we, as kids, used to just run round and hide and play in that passageway. And one day in the summer, we had water balloons. And we thought, what would be a really good prank is to just lob water balloons at cyclists as they go past. Now, that's a bad thing. You know, I'm not going to blame anyone. My mum does listen to this, so that is the reason I'm not blaming my mum. But she brought me up wrong. And so we lobbed it at cyclists, and generally, because, you know, there was a few of us and we were kids, and we had some girls, and girls can't throw. And so generally we missed a few cyclists. I'm taking everyone down. My mum, women, no, we'd missed loads of cyclists. And then once we finally finally hit one, and this old man was not having that. We just kind of ran round the passage going, whoa. He got off his bike and knocked on my front door, because we were doing it right outside my house, which was stupid. If you are going to water bomb cyclists, don't do it on your front door. That is crazy. What are you thinking? And so he knocked on my front door, and I thought, I am in trouble. My mum is hard line. She is coming after me. And so we heard my mum shouting my name, and I said to the guys, don't worry guys, I'll take the rap for you all, like a big hero. And I was like, it's on me. And I went in and I saw my mum's face, and I was like, it wasn't me, it was them. Honestly, I didn't even know what water balloons are. And I was just like crying. I was like, don't tell me off. It's horrible. And so, what are we doing? Oh, telling off. And so the prophet is there, and he's telling David off. And when we get told off, we don't like it. What happened? I got a lot of telling off. Should we leave it there? Otherwise I might tell you too much about my parents' parenting skills. And so, no, they just told me off and probably grounded me and took money off me. I was grounded a fair bit, it's fair to say. But yeah, I got the blame. The stupid guests in my house, they got nothing. Poor parent on their behalf. So we all hate being told off, and if we're going to get told off, we sometimes lash out, or we sometimes kind of justify what we're doing. Oh yeah, but it happened because of this. And so this prophet's got to go to the hero king. He's got to go to David, who everybody loves, and who's taken over from Saul, and all the people are behind him. And he's got to go, I know what you have done. And he is going to do that knowing that this is a guy who's already caused death by covering this up. He could kill me. And so Nathan goes and tells him, in 2 Samuel 12, he tells him this story. And he gives him a little example of a man who steals a sheep from a man who basically that's all he has. And David's so angry, that's a disgrace. And Nathan goes, well, that's what you've done. You've stolen this man's wife. And that's pretty much all he had. And you've killed him for that wife. And instead of kind of getting angry at him, David, it says his response is that he kind of fell down, he was repentant, and he ends up worshipping God. And ultimately, David's response is that he goes, my goodness, I have sinned against God. I am a mess. And because a man comes up to him and really says, look, I know what you've done. And the questions that come to us from this, I should have 3 things, is that who in our lives has the right to ask us tough questions? Who has the right to come up to us and say, how are you doing? How is that really going in your life? You told me before you were struggling with this. How is that going? Who has the right to tell us off? Now, no one wants to be told off. But there are times in my life where people, as a grown-up, people have had to tell me off because I'm out of order. Because sometimes you just can't see things. Sometimes the way you are with people and the way you say things, you always think from your perspective. And I've needed people to tell me, you are out of line there. And I've had to take that because they were right and they were wise. Okay, so who has the right to tell us off? And who is close enough to our lives to know? Okay, because David could hide it from anybody. But this guy was close to God. He wasn't really close to David particularly, but he's close to God, and God revealed it to him. Okay, and so that this guy went and he shared that with David. And as we'll see, that actually from this, that this was not something that ended up defining David. And so the third thing is, as he comes, Psalm 51, that's where we're going to flick to in a second. That's where we see David's reaction. Now, as people, bear with me, as people, we like to label people for what they've done. Good, bad. Now, in that picture, obviously none of you need me to explain who that picture is. That's obviously Brian Laws and Ivano Bonetti from the famous Grimsby Town team of 1995. But you knew that. You knew that. Everyone, I was telling Isaac about this, and I said, oh, you won't remember him. You know, you probably were quite young because he was 1995. And Isaac was like, I was -4. Oh, I was like, oh, I'm old now. Shut up, Isaac. And so anyway, so Brian Laws, the man without the long hair, he was our manager. And at the time, Grimsby Town, we were second in the championship. Okay, and so around Christmas time, we were like, there's that dream of maybe we can get in the Premier League. Maybe. It's always the hope that kills you. And so we were thinking, maybe. And then it was going well, and we'd signed this guy, Ivano Bonetti, who at that time was the first Italian to ever score in English football. Like, this was exotic. I have no idea why he's in Grimsby. It doesn't make any sense. Even now, he'd won the Italian league. I mean, he was old, but like still, we came and we were like, this guy's amazing. But Grimsby Town couldn't afford to pay for him. So we all like passed buckets around the crowd. We were lobbing him money. That's how you pay for transfers. None of you Russian billionaires. That's how you pay for transfers. You buy your Italian with the money you were going to buy a burger with. That's how you pay for players. And so he came and he scored some goals. Life was good. And then we started losing a couple of games. We lost 2 or 3 on the bounce. We're still in the playoffs, but things were starting to slide. And then, one day at half-time, rumours broke that there'd been an argument in the changing rooms, and Brian Laws, our manager, had thrown a plate of chicken wings at Ivano Bonetti and broke his face, which he had done. And this is their kind of apology and make-up. You can see Bonetti with long hair looks really happy. He's really happy to be like, oh yeah, I've forgiven him. No problems whatsoever. And so yeah, they had this big falling out. Bonetti left us. So Grimsby technically still owe me some money back, really. And so he left us, and we got nearly relegated. Sad times. Now, if you ask anyone in Grimsby, that man Brian Laws, he was a footballer. He played for Nottingham Forest. He won the FA Cup. He managed the Premier League. If you ask anyone in Grimsby, he's the chicken man. He threw chicken wings at Bonetti. His name is Mud. Because we want to label him with the bad things that he has done. Okay, and we're comfortable with that because it makes us feel okay. And we can do that with this story, and we can do that with David, and we can do that with other characters. But as you read through the New Testament and all the mentions of David, there is no mention of David and Bathsheba. Okay, when David's referenced in the New Testament, is often referenced because Jesus being the son of David, but all the references about David, they don't say, oh, but don't forget, David did this. They don't hold that over him. They don't have, yeah, but David, don't forget, he was a bit of a mess. And something that I kind of hate, and I understand why we do these things. I don't like these things. I'll read it. So it's just the kind of thing about all the characters in the Bible. It says Jacob was a cheater, Peter had a temper, David had an affair, Noah got drunk, Jonah ran from God, Paul was a murderer, Gideon was insecure, Miriam was a gossiper, Martha was a worrier, Thomas was a doubter, Sarah was impatient, Elijah was moody, Moses stuttered, Zacchaeus was too short, Abraham was old, and Lazarus was dead. And so, fair enough, I'll give you the last one. And so that's there, and I've been in places where they're saying, so, you know, God can use any of us, and that's fine, and that's a good thing to kind of see that you don't have to be perfect to be used by God, and that is good, you know, and there is nothing wrong with that. What I don't like is that we kind of we label, and I almost think God's like, yeah, but that's not who they were, is it? Like, what we do is we list their faults, and the danger of that is then you can then put a slide up about me. We haven't got a slide up about me. That would have been amazing, wouldn't it? Dell was this, and that would have been horrible. You know, the last thing I want is you to put a big PowerPoint up saying, and Dell did this, and Dell did this, and Dell did this. Because that's not how God sees us. You know, he doesn't see us like that. And we'll see in Psalm 51, as we read through, we're going to see David's reaction to what he's done. David's not, he knows he's made a mistake, he knows that he's done something that is terrible and a disgrace. And in verses 1 to 2, it says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. And then as we skip to 7, we're just going to skip 7 to 10, it says, cleanse me with hyssop and I shall be clean. Wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit in me. Okay, and so David is there going, I have messed up. It says at the start of Psalm 51 that he wrote that just after he'd been confronted with about the stuff with Bathsheba. So he's throwing himself on God saying, God, I am a mess. Would you create a pure heart in me? Would you create a new heart in me? Would you wash me as clean? And 1 Corinthians 13, verse 5, it says, love keeps no records of wrongs. You know, and if God is love, when we come to him, that means when we look at these kind of things, I think God's like, what are you on about? Like, he doesn't keep these big lists of what we've done. You know, because when we trade our kind of sin in and we say, God, will you forgive us? He takes it away from us and he keeps no record of wrongs. And so therefore, the reason that these people were used by God is because they had hearts to listen to God. They had hearts to follow God. Of course they're not perfect people. Of course they made mistakes. But they were used by God because they knew what it was to respond to God and be in love with God and follow God. Okay, not because of what they had done. And so, to bring us to basically the kind of conclusion, and so, so Dennis has given you out a red ribbon. So where's Pete? Pete's going to come back up. There he is. And so, Dennis has given you a red ribbon. And in their kind of Psalm 51, David says, you know, wash me and I'll be as white as snow. And the other time that comes up is in Isaiah 1. It says, like, my sins were like crimson, but then you've washed them white as snow. And so we all know there are things that we've kind of messed up in and hold on to, and we've fallen away from God. And that's what this kind of little red ribbon, which hopefully you've all got, represents. It represents the fact that we have made some mistakes. And like Gary was saying about the rocks and the backpack earlier, we can carry those things around with us and they can weigh us down. But you know what? Just as it says, wash me clean as snow, as we come to the cross, And as we say, do you know what? Jesus, you make all things new. Would you take that sin away from me? And we can walk clean as snow, and we can walk in forgiveness. And next to the cross, we've got two things. We've got some white ribbon, which obviously represents clean. And we've got some marbles, which kind of represent stones, but I couldn't get stones. And so, the first story we saw of David was a guy who took down Goliath, took down giant. That's pretty much the first thing we talked about. You know, he had giants in his life, and the only way he could do that was in God's strength. And that was the man he was called to be. A man who would take down giants. A man who would live his life in God's strength, not in his own strength. So, as Pete and the band are going to lead us in worship, I would encourage you to take your kind of red ribbon and to represent all the things you've done wrong and just lob it at the cross. And then you can take a white ribbon as a reminder that he's washed us white as snow. We don't have to carry around this shame anymore. Or a stone to remind us that even though you might be facing giants in your life, that in God's strength we can overcome those things. It's not about how good or bad we are, but it's about how close we are to God and how much we let him in his presence unfold in our lives. So I'm just going to pray, and the band are going to lead us. And whatever you do, whether you do it at the end, but like forgiveness needs an action from us often. You know, as Lucas said from 1 John, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just. It's not an automatic thing. We do that by confessing them. So sometimes it's good to practically do something, get out of your seat and just do something to represent, you know what, God, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want this in my life. I want to take hold of that forgiveness. And so as the band will do that, I would encourage you, as the band plays or as it finishes, just to do that, lob that there and pick up whatever you want. And so, God, I just thank you that we have forgiveness, Lord, which it just cannot be bought by our own abilities, cannot be bought by our own goodness. Lord, we thank you so much for Jesus. We thank you that you would give your lives, that you would call us your people. Lord, that you would be a God who makes all things new in lives which have been stained so badly. So Lord, would you just help us live in that truth, that we would not walk back to the things that have kept us held hostage and kept us trapped, Lord. Help us with that, we pray.